When most people think of World War III, their minds immediately picture dramatic images of tanks rolling across borders, fighter jets soaring in the skies, or cities under heavy bombardment. That's the picture painted by movies and sometimes even the evening news. But in reality, the idea of a modern world war is far more complex and subtle than that. It's not just about armies and weapons anymore. It's about who controls resources, who influences global opinion, and who can outmaneuver others in the arenas of technology and economics. The narrative you see on television or read in headlines often reduces these complex struggles into oversimplified stories, leaving audiences unaware of the deeper layers shaping global tension. Right now, we are living through one of the most significant shifts in global power dynamics in decades. For much of the last century, the United States stood largely unchallenged as the dominant superpower. Its military, financial system, and cultural influence set the rules of the international order. But times are changing. Nations like China and Russia are no longer content to play supporting roles. They are actively building new spheres of influence, forming alliances, and investing heavily in technology and defense. Even regional powers in Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America are stepping forward to claim more influence. This rise of a multipolar world has introduced uncertainty, and uncertainty always brings risks of miscalculation. Take a look at some of the conflicts dominating the news today: the war in Ukraine, rising tensions in Taiwan, or the ongoing instability in the Middle East. At first glance, they may seem like separate, isolated disputes. But when you zoom out, a bigger picture emerges. These aren't just regional struggles. They are interconnected battles in a global contest for power and security. What happens in one corner of the world creates ripple effects everywhere else. A military clash in Eastern Europe can influence food prices in Africa. A dispute over islands in the Pacific can disrupt supply chains in Europe and America. And yet, much of the mainstream coverage frames these issues as local events, rather than threads in a global web of competition. That's why the central question is not whether a global conflict could erupt someday. It's whether we're already moving down that path right now. The truth is that a world war in the 21st century may not start with a dramatic declaration or a sudden invasion. It may emerge slowly through a series of escalations, sanctions between countries, battles over trade routes, cyberattacks on critical systems, and proxy wars fought far from the spotlight. These events are happening already, just without the label World War III attached to them. The danger is that people fail to recognize the seriousness of these moves until they escalate beyond control. History offers us a warning. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union never engaged in direct full-scale war, but the world still lived under constant fear of nuclear confrontation. The conflict wasn't just about weapons. It was about ideology, economics, technology, and influence. Today, in a digital age where nations are connected more tightly than ever, those same pressures are resurfacing, only in more unpredictable ways. Cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, energy resources, and global finance have become new battlegrounds. This is the part that's rarely emphasized in traditional media, even though it's the area where the seeds of the next great conflict might already be taking root. One of the biggest misconceptions about global conflict is that it must begin with a dramatic military strike. The truth is, a modern world war could very well start in ways that seem far less visible. Instead of bombs or tanks, the first shots might be fired through economic policies, digital networks, or trade disputes. Imagine waking up to see prices of everyday goods skyrocketing overnight, or entire banking systems frozen by cyberattacks. These scenarios may not carry the noise of explosions, but their impact on people's lives can be just as devastating. This is why experts warn that the front line of a potential world war may be invisible to the eye, happening quietly in places like financial markets and global trade. Consider the global economy as an example. Across Europe, many countries have faced energy shortages that drive up heating costs. In Asia, trade tensions are disrupting access to critical technologies. And in developing regions, food insecurity is rising because global supply chains are strained. These aren't random events. They are the consequences of international disputes spilling into everyday life. Inflation, rising debt, and unpredictable markets are some of the clearest signs that economic pressure is being used as a tool of conflict. This type of silent warfare is rarely labeled as such in mainstream reports, but it is one of the strongest signals of escalating global rivalry. Meanwhile, behind the headlines, major powers are preparing in more traditional ways as well. China is rapidly modernizing its military with new ships, aircraft, and missile systems. Russia, despite facing sanctions, continues to strengthen its defense industry and form alliances with countries outside the Western Bloc. Even mid-sized nations are increasing their defense budgets and stockpiling weapons, signaling that they anticipate a more unstable future. These preparations don't always make the evening news, but they paint a picture of a world that is quietly arming itself for potential large-scale conflict. But the battlefield of the future will not only be fought with soldiers and machines. It will also unfold in cyberspace and information networks. Cyber attacks on hospitals, banks, or government agencies can paralyze entire nations without a single bullet being fired. Misinformation campaigns spread online can destabilize societies by eroding trust between citizens and their leaders. At the same time, the race for dominance in artificial intelligence, space technology, and quantum computing is becoming just as important as the race for nuclear weapons once was. These less visible arenas are shaping the balance of power, though they rarely receive the attention they deserve in mainstream coverage. So here's a difficult question. Has World War III already begun, just in a different form? Instead of armies clashing in open fields, the conflict might already be playing out through hacking, propaganda, trade restrictions, and diplomatic standoffs. The challenge for the public is recognizing that warfare today doesn't look like it did in the past. It's not always about massive battles. It's about a constant tug-of-war for control across politics, economics, and technology. By understanding this broader perspective, we can see that what's unfolding today may be the early stages of a global struggle, even if it hasn't yet been officially declared a war. Mainstream media often prefers stories that are dramatic and easy to package. A missile test or a military parade grabs attention immediately, while a cyber breach in a government database rarely makes the front page. Yet these subtle incidents may be far more consequential in the long run, because they strike at the very infrastructure that societies rely on every day: banking, energy, communication, and healthcare. The truth is that the less visible forms of conflict are often the most dangerous. They can weaken nations silently, without the public realizing what's happening until the damage has already been done. Meanwhile, as the public consumes simplified headlines, many of the most important developments are taking place behind closed doors. Governments around the world are preparing backup systems to shield themselves from financial shocks. For instance, several nations are exploring alternatives to the US dollar as the main reserve currency. This is not just an economic decision, it is a strategic move to reduce vulnerability in times of crisis. A financial system less dependent on a single global currency could reshape international trade, alliances, and even military strategy. But these subtle shifts are rarely discussed in detail on television or in newspapers. Another factor that often goes unnoticed is the transformation of global alliances. Traditional groups such as NATO, once seen as the backbone of Western defense, are facing new internal pressures. At the same time, emerging coalitions like BRICS, made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are gaining influence in trade and finance. These new alliances are not just economic partnerships, they represent alternative visions of how the world should be governed. The balance of global power is no longer defined by one or two superpowers but by a web of shifting relationships, each with its own ambitions and risks. History shows us that wars are rarely fought alone. Countries form alliances to pool resources, share defense, and project strength. But alliances can also pull nations into conflicts they might not have chosen on their own. This is one of the dangers of the current moment. If one country becomes entangled in a regional dispute, its allies may feel compelled to intervene, turning a small conflict into a global one. This interconnectedness means that even local tensions, whether in Eastern Europe, the South China Sea, or the Middle East, carry the potential to draw in major world powers. Adding to this risk is the growing sense of desperation in many countries. Economic hardship, political instability, and rising debt are pushing governments to take bold, sometimes reckless, steps. Leaders under pressure at home may turn to aggressive foreign policies as a way to gain support or distract from internal problems. Throughout history, economic collapse has often been a precursor to major wars. When leaders run out of options, conflict can become a tool of survival. That's why the economic struggles we see across the globe today are more than just financial issues. They may also be warning signs of larger conflicts to come. So where does all of this leave us today? We are living in a world where every regional clash, every cyber incident, and every trade dispute carries the risk of sparking something far larger. The global system is fragile, and like a room filled with gasoline, it only takes one small spark to set everything ablaze. That spark doesn't have to come from a direct military strike. It could come from a diplomatic breakdown, a miscalculation in a tense standoff, or even a financial collapse that spreads panic across nations. The interconnectedness of modern society means that a conflict in one region can rapidly trigger reactions worldwide. Consider Taiwan, one of the most significant flashpoints in global politics today. The island is central not just because of its geography but because it produces a huge share of the world's advanced semiconductors, the tiny chips that power everything from smartphones to fighter jets. A conflict here would not only pit the United States and China against one another but also send shockwaves through the global economy. Similarly, tensions between Israel and Iran in the Middle East represent another potential ignition point, where long-standing rivalries could easily spiral into something larger. And then there's North Korea, a country whose unpredictable missile tests constantly threaten to destabilize East Asia. The truly frightening reality is that no one can say with certainty how close we are to a larger global confrontation. History has taught us that major wars often begin unexpectedly. In the years leading up to World War I, few believed a global war was even possible, until one assassination in Europe set off a chain reaction. The same uncertainty exists today. With so many moving parts, it's difficult to know which event, mistake, or escalation might push the world past the tipping point. And by the time it becomes clear, it may already be too late to stop. But it's not all doom and gloom. There is still hope in awareness and understanding. The more people are informed about the deeper causes of global tension, the more pressure there is on leaders to choose diplomacy over conflict. Public opinion has power, and in democratic societies especially, it can influence the direction of foreign policy. By recognizing that modern warfare doesn't always begin with tanks and bombs, but often with trade disputes, cyber attacks, and propaganda, we become better equipped to see warning signs early and push for peaceful solutions before things spiral out of control. So, the next time you see World War III trending in the news or on social media, remember that the truth is more complex than a single headline. The world is already engaged in forms of conflict that don't always fit the traditional definition of war. And while it might not look like the past, the stakes are just as high. This is why staying informed, asking questions, and looking beyond simplified narratives is so important. Because the real story of global conflict isn't just about nations fighting, it's about the survival and stability of our interconnected world. And the choices we make today could determine whether we avoid the nightmare of a third world war or live through it.